Story 1. I don't know if it's the first sign, but I was teaching a small class of children, and one child in particular would speak very negatively of himself, as though someone in his life, like a parent, had said those things to him on many occasions and he'd internalized them. There was one day in particular when he answered a question incorrectly and then proceeded to call himself stupid over and over. I reassured him he's not stupid, but you could tell by the look on this poor boy's face he believed he was. Story 2. Another behavior I've noticed is the art of becoming invisible. The child who tries their best not to be noticed, whether at home or in the school environment. They're usually the ones who never raise their hand to answer questions, even though they may know the answer, and they seldom initiate or join conversations. This tendency is not because they're naturally introverted, but rather because being unnoticed is their coping mechanism. It's their way of avoiding negative attention or criticism at home, where standing out might not have the best outcomes. They become masters of blending into the background, often coming across as extremely independent, when in reality, it's a learned survival skill that's been ingrained from walking on eggshells around unpredictable caregivers. It's bittersweet when these patterns manifest because, on the one hand, they display a certain resilience, but on the other hand, it becomes a barrier to forming healthy, transparent relationships where they feel safe to be seen and heard. Story 3. I would say a huge red flag is when the child looks genuinely terrified to make even the smallest mistake. If they are constantly apologizing for things that are not their fault, that is a pretty bad sign. Another warning is if they go silent or tense up the second their parent walks into the room. If it feels like the child is tiptoeing through life, it is worth paying attention. Story 4. They form an unhealthy attachment to any authority figure and treat any kind adult as a parental figure or friend, even when it is not appropriate. It makes children much more vulnerable to further abuse, as they believe they are mature enough for a platonic relationship with grown adults, speaking from experience unfortunately. Story 5. As a teacher who has covered every grade level from transitional kindergarten to 12th, I find that younger children with abusive or neglectful parents emulate behaviors through really rough or aggressive role play. They only know what they have been shown. As children get older, I know something is off when I start hearing them talk about sex in a way that is a little too beyond the nonsense you hear when 5th to 9th grade kids lie about what they know. Story 6. Traumatized or neglected kids are prone to having savior complexes. This means that they will always put others' needs before their own, often to a problematic degree. Story 7. I think being classified as an old soul can be an indicator. I was told a lot growing up how mature I was, and the reality was that I had to essentially grow up overnight and was raising my little sister because my mom was struggling with drug addiction, but people didn't see that until much later. Story 8. Emotional neediness or insatiability. Sometimes a sign that a child did not get the love they needed at a young age and, as a result, feels an inner void that can never be entirely filled. Story 9. The child who can't attend anything outside of school hours. I'm not talking about the troublemakers either. I'm talking about the high-grade overachiever who never gets invited because everyone knows their parents will say no to the smallest inconveniences to their own plans, and their parents are highly discriminatory. The gentrified type with snobbish parents. That child's entire life is being run by their parents, and they have to comply, or their entire existence and support as their child are questioned by them. There is a 100% chance that child will severely lack social skills and become a recluse later in life. Don't ask me how I know. Story 10. As a teacher, it can be hard to tell, but I would say a kid who is mean and says mean things somehow had those things said to him or her. I had a high school student once who pushed a teacher down the stairs. He was expelled, and 2 years later he was in my classroom. He was interesting, creative, and pretty quiet, and then one day he just picked up a chair and threw it out of a classroom window from the 3rd floor. The principal was out of the building, so I sat with him. He apologized and said he was just a bad kid and that his dad often used a belt on him, and he deserved it. I reported suspected abuse to the principal and worked with him on the yearbook and other creative projects that year. Never had a problem with him again and often wonder how he is doing. He was a nice kid. Story 11. Answering as someone with terrible parents and grandparents who I was also raised by for years of my life. When I lived with my grandparents, I was super obedient and didn't talk back to anyone. I was known as the nice and quiet kid who wasn't a problem for anyone. What was going on behind the scenes was that I'd get hit if I opposed my grandparents, so I learned that was a bad thing. With my mom, who is neglectful and puts her boyfriends over us, I don't respect her, I don't like her, so I don't care about what she wants. But I'm not dumb enough to be so rebellious that I'll do anything to jeopardize my future plans. I saw an example of talking back to teachers, and I can see where that would be the case, but it could also be something to look out for in someone who is overly obedient. Story 12. They're always dirty. Kids get filthy dirty. But if they always have dirty fingernails, you can just tell when it's regular old dirt or if it's been there forever. Unwashed hair, dried snot. I had to edit the dirty fingernails part. It wasn't my intent to upset anyone. Story 13. Apologizing all the time over every little thing that isn't even their fault. Being really jumpy at everything. Never feeling safe even in your own home that you own. Constant anxiety and uneasiness just waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Being unable to maintain healthy adult human relationships because of attachment issues and trauma responses. It's just awful all around. Story 14. 1. When they smell like bodily fluids every time you see them, it indicates poor hygiene. When they flinch when you make sudden or fast movements around them. If they are behind developmentally and the parents refuse to even acknowledge it. I know some people may lack the resources and money to get their special needs children help, and I am not talking about them. I am talking about the parents who deliberately deny that their child even needs help when they are obviously falling behind their peers in meeting milestones. Story 15. Lack of self-confidence, deeply rooted sentiment of insecurity, and lack of affection. Obviously, there might be different disorders based on the context. It's a very broad and complex question. Furthermore, we should take time to get to know someone and not resort to hasty analysis. For example, oh, he is shy, he must have terrible parents. That might be part of his or her current personality and change during teenage years. Story 16. Teacher here. Some kids are outliers, so this isn't always true. Seeing these patterns over weeks and months. Flinching when I use typical hand gestures or turn towards them. Tired all the time, usually no bedtime. Rotting teeth. Food hoarding, when the student and family are not food insecure. Sexually harassing peers in prepubescent years. Atypically strong attachment to adults, to the point that it is preferred over peers. Consistently poor hygiene that does not improve, even with support services. Reeking of cigarette smoke in the year 2024. Being left alone overnight in elementary years. Frequently keeping older siblings home to care for younger siblings, as a regular routine. Viewing everything through a religious lens only primarily fear-based. Untreated infections, toothaches, skin conditions. Refusal to allow student to receive support services. Despite student having behavioral issues that are impeding learning. Edit to add a few more signs. Student often attends school while very sick, fever, vomiting, injuries that affect walking, etc. And is afraid for the office to call parents to pick up. Afraid to the point of crying and begging the office not to call. Students under 8 walking more than a couple of blocks alone. Removing student from school for month-long, casual family vacation without prior notice to the school or teacher. Note: some of these may be related to a child's disability or health issues, which should always be considered. Story 17. The kid who genuinely eats school breakfasts and lunches with such fervor. He would also ask if he could take a snack or two home for his siblings. When I would meet with him, I had to reassure him many times that it's okay if he ate his bag of chips for himself, and I would give him another to take home. I would even tell him it would be okay if he ate those too. It broke my heart seeing him like that. Trust me, those school meals did not look good. Child welfare was called and has been involved, but there hasn't been much change. Story 18. Looks for validation from other adults, like teachers, as a form of love they are not receiving at home. This one took me until halfway through a Doctor of Philosophy program to realize. Story 19. My wife is a teacher. A kid in her class had lice, so they sent her to the office and called the mom. The mom could not come get her. The next day, the kid returned to school, lice and all. The mom did nothing the night before. The poor kid was humiliated when she had to leave class again. Story 20. First sign my school got was me writing horror stories on a school computer and them telling my dad. The next day, I couldn't look at anyone or eat for weeks. Ended up scarred for life, and they called Child Protective Services. Story 21. At the middle school age, the tendency to shut down when they are corrected or receive a consequence at school is telling. A well-adjusted kid will get angry or upset with you, and some will even tell you what their parents will do if they find out, like losing video games or their phone or being grounded. They will also tell you not to call, and if you do, they will come in the next day mad at you and usually tell you their consequence at home. Think, my mom yelled at me last night because of you. A kid with abusive or overly harsh parents will kind of just turn off and make themselves small. They don't bargain with you about calling home, and a lot of times they don't show up the next day. I rarely call home if I see that reaction, only if it's a situation where I am told I have to, like with failing grades or something. Story 22. I have a friend, and we walk frequently. She works with troubled kids through the school system. Some kids are in need of an amazing amount of support. An elementary-level kid came to class wearing the same clothes as the day before, and he stank. She is petite and likes gender-neutral clothing. She grabbed a t-shirt and shorts from her trunk and had him change. They fit okay. She told me his face lit up with joy because they were clean and soft. She has so many stories like this. The school counselor is doing what they can. Some days, my heart is so broken. Story 23. I was abused as a child. I was removed from my home and placed in a children's home. It was called The Grange in Coventry. It was featured on Panorama, a BBC television show, in a segment about the abuse of children. Use your imagination. My abuse went from physical to other things while in care. I saw and experienced things I wouldn't expect anyone to ever experience. I have seen dogs treated with more respect than we kids were in that home. Injections when we were naughty, viciously fighting over toys, hiding toys in the grounds, burying them to play with at a later date. I still suffer now from what happened to me. To the person who said they are a teacher and that kids forget you when you show kindness, you're very, very wrong. We kids with nothing family-wise do remember you. We don't leave behind the kindness you showed us. Ever. We hold on to it. And sometimes I can replay that kindness and cry with tears running down my face. I am a 51-year-old man. I come from a generation and background where it's hard to admit that. But to all teachers and people who show kids from the naughty home kindness and respect when they have never been allowed that, keep doing it. You're making the world a better place. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I still struggle to have any contact with others. Sometimes even when my wife puts her hand on my shoulder, I tense up. I'll cry without noise, just tears rolling down my face thinking about stuff. Also, I'll put myself in situations where I don't care about the outcome or be the aggressor to bullies much taller and bigger than me. When you have experienced what abused people have experienced, nothing scares you anymore. I just feel like dying would be a release from the pain, if anything. Story 24. My friend, who is a pediatric nurse, said that when children are very quiet, do not play like children, and are unusually well behaved, it is a big red flag that their home life is horrific. Story 25. The parents vlog every moment of their lives, monetize them, and let strangers call them nephew or niece. They don't prioritize their child's safety so they can make a buck. Story 26. I don't know about the first sign, but there are several concerning signs my teachers noticed when I was a child. I thought my teachers just really liked me. No, they felt pity and sadness. Elementary school. Sleeping through lessons several days a week. Dark circles under the eyes. Desperately wants praise from teachers. Parents don't show up for conferences unless absolutely necessary. Parents drop the kid off too early or pick up too late. Makes a lot of friends that are actually mean, but the kid is desperate for approval and to fit in. Always the last to grab a snack or is consistently hesitant about doing something that hasn't been established as okay. Teenagers. Asks permission to shower or eat. Is hesitant to ask for help. Either withdrawn or always around other people. Is at after-school activities more than other kids. Sleeps through their classes. Always asks peers for rides. Parents are not involved. Scared to ask questions and takes a while to trust your intentions. Cynical. Tries hard or not at all. Story 27. When they never even consider what others need or want, they have been taught that they need to look out for themselves, and everyone else is doing the same. Story 28. I'm sure this one has been said, but consistently apologizing and people-pleasing to seem accepted. The more a kid says, "I'm sorry," for things way out of their control or not even remotely their fault, the worse I feel for them. The same with the kids who don't know what they like or dislike and just go with the crowd because they are too afraid to speak up for fear of being mocked or told they're wrong. I speak from personal experience and also seeing it play out in nieces, nephews, and small cousins.